CSTEP and OSPI are partnering to provide this professional learning experience. And that's really what it is. It's a professional learning experience for teachers that's about 18 hours long. We like to do it 3 days in a row. So like 3 school days as the best experience. We've played with other models and none of them are as effective as 3 days in a row in person. So that's what we are requesting from districts to commit to. And we go over the 6 themes in Dr. Stembridge's book, and we go over the 5 planning questions and really talk about how planning is the highest leverage practice that teachers can engage in to have a culturally responsive classroom. And so we meet usually in a school, in a classroom, in a space where we can learn together, and it's very dynamic, it's very adaptive. We go over the same stuff at every residency, but never in the same order. And we get into a classroom and we try it out. And CSTEP is there to help support. And this year, CSTEP's providing lunch for teachers every day. So it's really trying to provide a really high quality learning experience for everyone involved. So that's kind of the overall really big logistical structure of it. We can get into details of how many, but we've had as few as 3 folks, I think, and up to 20 in a residency. It is definitely though for classroom teachers. So if folks, admin, instructional coaches, TOSAs want to attend, great. They pair up with a classroom teacher and participate in the experience. So I think I'm going to pause it there, hand it over to Dr. Stembridge and hear from him, and then we'll hear from some folks who've been through it. So I'm happy to introduce Dr. Stembridge. We just generally call him Yemi, and he's going to talk through his work and his ideas for how this has come together. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Anzara. Thank you, everyone who's watching this. I'm very excited for this conversation. I'm stoked about this upcoming year. I'm working on a book right now. I'm very excited about it. The book is a love letter to my mentor who died on September 11th of 2020. His name was Charlie Tosconi. He wrote 5 books. This is one of them, Schooling in America, A Social Philosophical Perspective. I'm drawing heavily on some of his ideas. He was one of the people who was at the epicenter of the origin story of equity. And so this is a person who I loved, he loved me. We had a very close relationship. He taught me a lot about equity broadly, taught me a lot about what it means to be a person of integrity in the world generally as well. And so, you know, I'm so excited about this conversation that we're going to have this year in residencies across the state of Washington, because I feel like it is the exact right conversation that we're supposed to be having in terms of what's good for kids. So I'm going to take about 45 minutes here, and I'm going to be kind of in lecture mode, and I'm going to show a video. And my goal is to define what it is we mean by a residency in culturally responsive education, and then to give I'm talking about 35,000 foot view of what culturally responsive education means and requires of us. All right, so I'm going to go into share mode here. You should be seeing my screen with the slide book cover. You can see over my back shoulder here that the cover is an original work of art from this super cool dude named El Eskenazi, a Dutch artist and musician who I was hanging out with. I met when I was in Amsterdam in the summer of 2019. The piece is called Kinda Blue. I think it really, again, reflects kind of the energy that we're bringing into the residencies. These residencies are not static. They are expected to be dynamic experiences that push our thinking. We are not studying the problems of equity. We are seeking to develop practices that are informed by our best thinking that will create opportunities, on-ramps that work for every kid that we have in our classroom. I am defining here, let me give you a definition of residency. I'm going to give you these handouts in a few minutes. Hang tight, I'm going to give you the handouts. I don't want you to get ahead of me, but you will get what you see on the screen. A residency, as Zara was mentioning, is 18 hours generally. I think that the best model is 3 straight days where we can just really go hard, think deeply, make connections. I think what I hear back from teachers in terms of what's most useful about the residencies is the opportunity to take these big ideas and operationalize them immediately. And so we are thinking carefully about our work, and then we are trying things out with real live human children in your school. And when we do that, we have opportunities for every person in the residency to make their own unique connection to the big understandings that we want for teachers, because this is not a program. There's no algorithm. One of the titles that we were tossing around for my next book was More Art, Less Algorithm. That was one of the titles that got knocked off the list. The title actually is Brilliant Teaching Using Culture and Artful Thinking to Close Equity Gaps. Coming June 2023. So as I'm writing this book, I'm thinking. And one of the things that we do in the residency is we have an experience in thinking. We're thinking deeply about what equity requires of us in our classroom practices. And so the premise of the book that I'm working on now, manuscript's due in 12 days, is that we're a painter is an artist who creates on the medium of a canvas. Teachers are artists who create through the medium of experience. And I'm saying that in order for us to be able to close equity gaps with our teaching, we need teaching that is more artful than algorithmic, teaching that is able to be responsive to the actual humans in the classrooms where teachers are teaching. That's not something that can be programmed outside of that classroom without the support, the direction, the agency of the teachers. Teachers are the ones who are going to be able to affect the kind of changes that we want to see. It's never going to be done from a policy. If it's a good policy, it's only going to be a good policy because it lets teachers teach brilliantly. And so I'm drawing on these art motifs. I wonder how many of you are amateur Annie Leibovitzes with your cell phones. I mean, this device has a camera that's more powerful than any camera that Dorothea Lange or Ansel Adams ever used. And so I personally love, trying to get good shots by playing with my camera phone. And so in photography, there's this idea of layering. Layering refers to the setting up in a photographic image something interesting on multiple planes of the picture. So, I do a lot of writing here in Denver, Colorado at a coffee shop called Pablo's on 6th. So if you're in Colorado, come check out Pablo's on 6th. Here's the only thing is that we're real coffee shop people at Pablo's. We don't even have Wi-Fi. So if you're one of these, new age, fancy pants type people who requires Wi-Fi at your coffee shop, we're going to say you're not gritty enough for the Pablo's crowd. And also, I have a hotspot on my phone, so I just connect to my own Wi-Fi, but you get what I'm saying. Layering, I took this picture at Pablo's this morning. So layering, right, this is me. One of the things you can do is you can set your camera to the wide angle lens, widest angle lens possible, and then get close to, in this case, my coffee cup. And then you get in this first plane right here in the front and center in the photographic image, you get the coffee cup, but then you see a conversation happening in the middle of the image, and then you see the light source coming from the other side of Pablo's. And so this would be an example, my example of layering. Another example, Rebecca Norris Webb and Alex Webb, a photographing team. They do great layered images. You can follow them on Instagram. They're a great follow on Instagram. So here, right again, you see multiple planes. There's a depth. There's a richness. There's a kind of vitality that's available to us in this image. And I'm going to make the case that we as teachers, and particularly teachers who are interested in closing equity gaps and creating more responsive learning opportunities for our students, we can learn a lot from this practice of photographers of layering. This is a powerful image. I mean, you know, the sky here really speaks to me. And then you can see, it seems like, you know, miles and miles off in the distance of this image, horizon upon horizon upon horizon, like layering. So the helicopter here would be kind of in the middle plane of this image, and then the mountain landscape occupying the back plane. I like this one also, right? Because this couple here coming down about to come down the stairs, right? This image kind of, you know, compels me to think about what's their story. And then I see the little baby girl in the arms of what I would presume to be her father. There's a whole story there about relationship between parent and child. And so layering, this idea of layering is one of the motifs that I'm building on in the book that I'm working on now to inspire teachers for how we can think about developing learning experiences that are most likely going to work for our kids. When I'm thinking about culturally responsive education, one of the things I'm talking about is how are we providing on-ramps and access points and doorways for all of our students to be able to make connection with the most important parts of the understandings that we are teaching in classrooms. And layering makes me think about the kind of qualities of the opportunities I want to create for kids. I want to give kids opportunities where they can connect through the content, right? The big, beautiful ideas. And it's our responsibility, teachers, to convey to our students what is beautiful about the ideas that we're teaching. I love to see teachers get giddy and silly about their content. And I really love it when kids tease them about that, because that speaks to a kind of trust that students are investing in their teachers, saying, right, they're essentially saying, if you're excited about this, I'm going to tease you, but that's given me some indication that I should be excited too. So in terms of layering, we're layering these on-ramps. We're giving kids opportunities to connect with the big, interesting ideas that live conceptually, the conceptual pieces that live in the content. And then I'm thinking about how are we giving kids opportunities in the classroom through shared experiences in the classroom. How are we giving kids those same kinds of opportunities to connect with the understandings and the concepts, but using a frame of reference from a classroom-based learning experience? And then I'm also thinking in terms of those layered on-ramps and doorways and opportunities. I'm thinking about how are we giving kids opportunities to connect with the big ideas in our content, in our instruction, through the avenues of their own lived experiences. How are we giving them opportunities to mine the experiences that they share in their communities with the people who share their cultural fluencies? How are we pointing them in the direction of retrieving connections that are useful to them in school success? How are we giving kids a chance to draw from those cultural backgrounds, to use their cultural fluencies in ways that allow them to show their competence in school? So when I think about layering, right, I'm thinking about the big ideas that live in the content. I'm thinking about the shared learning experiences that we have in the classroom. And I'm thinking about my students' rich histories and inheritances as cultural beings, and how am I giving kids a chance to draw on those to engage in meaningful ways in my classroom instruction. So this is my definition for culturally responsive education in the classroom. I'm just going to read it. I think of culturally responsive education as a mental model that is useful for identifying themes and tools of practice for closing opportunity gaps. The CRE mental model gives conceptual context for policies and practices that focus on equity without marginalizing some students relative to others. It actively enlists the awareness of culture, race, ethnicity, gender, ability, and other social identity markers that shape the perceptions of educational opportunities. All right, so I'm going to show a film here in a couple of minutes because I want to show you what I think this looks like. This is a film that many of you have probably seen, and it's a film that I'm showing because I also want to give you a link so that you can show it to others, people that you are wanting to talk to about the possibility of a residency in your district. I say here, right, that CRE gives context for policies and practices that focus on equity without marginalizing some students relative to others. So first of all, our North Star is equity. We are doing what we are doing because we are trying to create more equitable learning opportunities for all of our students. So a couple of things. Remember this picture? Listen, this year, I'm being less nice about it. We got to retire this picture, okay? This picture was good at a time when we were dealing with audiences that lacked a conceptual baseline for understanding what it is we mean by equity. But this image is problematic because it still suggests that there's something that schools have to quantifiably put in place, a box, or take a box away. Listen, folks, I live in the real world, and whenever you tell a family, a community that you're going to take something away from them, even when you're telling them that this is in order to better serve others, most human beings, as charming as they may be at dinner parties on Saturday evenings, most human beings are going to think first and foremost about their own children's opportunities. And I just think it is fundamentally flawed for us to talk about equity as if it doesn't provide every kid the fairest opportunity to learn. We are not dealing, when we talk about equity, with a zero-sum game end goal. Equity, in the way that I have understood equity and that I'm talking about in chapter 2 of the book, where I'm going into the origin story of equity, equity is a positive sum game construct. When we have classrooms that are providing equitable opportunities for our most vulnerable students, all of the students in that classroom have fairer, richer, more rigorous, more responsive opportunities to engage. Now, some people may like the sound of that statement, but I'm telling you that we can do that. And in the residencies, we don't just talk about it. We don't just think deeply about all the obstacles to trying to do that. We put ourselves into pedagogical action, and we get in there and we go after it, which is, again, I'm thinking a lot about artists. No masterpiece was ever made for the artist's unwillingness to apply paint to a blank canvas. You got to get in there. You got to put some ideas up on the wall. You got to think carefully about what it is you're trying to do. And we have to learn in our practice. And so that's what that's the energy of the residency. That's what we're going after in the residency. 3 big ideas that live in the definition of equity. I'm not going through this right now. This will be stuff that we talk about in residencies though. Equity is measured by outcomes, not by inputs. That's the big difference between equity and equality. It does not mean that we manipulate outcomes. It means that outcomes are the test. If we provide the same at the starting line, that's equality. That is different from being able to see patterns of performance and achievement at the finish lines. When we see disparities that we can track via social groups, we know we have an equity problem. Equity is about quality and effective learning opportunities. We use culture to inform our understanding of what quality and effective learning opportunities are. But equity doesn't mean that we pigeonhole students into our narrow interpretation of their identity groups. So there's not a Mexican way to teach math. That's goofy. You shouldn't be thinking like that. What you want to think about is how can we provide learning opportunities so that all of our students are fairly able to draw from their background in order to make connections. And that is a matter of how we position the learning opportunity, how we build our classroom environment, how we invite our students' identities into the learning space. And then the third big idea in equity is that differences do not equate to deficits. We have to think carefully about this, because if we're not thinking carefully about difference does not equal deficit, then what we can easily do is design a whole educational system that doesn't actually prepare and test for intelligence. It prepares and tests for a particular kind of cultural fluency. And that's not equitable. Because we know, this isn't just a hope, we know that intelligence, and I'm going to define intelligence in the way anthropologists do, the ability to acquire understandings that serve one's own survival. We have brains to support our survival. Oftentimes in our modern Western society, this boils down to problem solving, decision-making, pattern recognition. But if we agree that intelligence, the intellectual capacity for survival, intelligence is evenly distributed across the human population because there are no subspecies human groups. We're all humans, races without any biological scientific merit. The human race is a continuum of shades and features and hair types, but there is no hard demarcation that cordons off one racial group from another. We know that. So we know that there's not some essential gene or molecule that identifies a person of one race from another. That means that intelligence, ability is evenly distributed across the human population. Difference, particularly cultural difference, does not equate to deficit. That means that our responsibility in terms of teaching is to create learning opportunities where we can give all of our kids, with these expressions of cultural difference, fair opportunities to demonstrate that they can come to know, that they can understand. Again, this is stuff that we're figuring out in the residencies. This is the mental model. I'm looking at my time. I'm about to go into a video here. This is the mental model that we use, the 6 themes. That's chapter 3. That's freely available through my website, dryemis.com. And then the 5 planning questions. 5 planning questions. I got a picture here. These 5 this is an actual picture of the day, April 12th, 2017. I was at Paris Elementary School in Aurora, Colorado, and the teacher's name who wrote this down. the primary grade teachers always have the best handwriting, right? I'm a high school English teacher. My kids used to always be like, "Are you nervous, Mr. Stembridge? Like, why does your writing look like that?" But kinder and first and second grade teachers have beautiful penmanship. Her name is Jean Becker. And so she, it's her handwriting. And we were tracking, because I had been doing several of these design studios in the school. And so we were tracking, when we're successful, what are the questions that we're asking? And so this was the day that the 5 planning questions were born. I'm kind of jazzed about that, because this is a model that I didn't set out to prove. This is a model that I learned in partnership with teachers from across the country. This is a quote from the book that I'm working on now. And then we're going to go into a video. I want to read this. Again, the title of the book, June 2023, Brilliant Teaching Using Culture and Artful Thinking to Close Equity Gaps. This is at the end of chapter 2, the chapter where I've told the equity story. It's very important to me that we keep our eye on the equity ball in this work. Otherwise, people think that this is, nice stuff to do. But my argument is this is necessary, that if we aren't thinking this way, we are essentially risking an entire generation of young people to low quality, ineffective educational experiences, which for the most vulnerable of them is likely to concretize their position on the lowest rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. I think it's that serious for the communities that we serve. All right, so this is me. I'm going to read it. Sorry if it's a little bit weird. I say lean into it. There is a final and yet critical point to be added to the definition of equity. Equity in education is an idea which is intended to be operationalized rather than merely pontificated. Though I may be called naive to retain belief in the promises of public schooling, my faith is underscored by concern for the alternatives. To be direct, if there is no public education option, I am dubious to the notion that the privileged in our society will downgrade the quality of the educational opportunities available to their own children. Rather, the greatest harm will be incurred in the communities who are most reliant on schools as an avenue to access opportunities in society. To dismantle public schools will profoundly exacerbate vulnerabilities. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that the lack of access to public education will likely concretize a functionally permanent underclass of economically and politically marginalized communities, which will in turn have a catastrophic effect on American society. Without schools, to be born into the lower classes of American society will require lottery-like circumstances to escape. So what I want to do is I want to show a film. I want to show a video. This is from a story that's told in the book at the start of chapter 2. So if you got the book, start of chapter 2, page 34, chapters 1 through 5 in this book. I started off with vignettes from classrooms. I was trying to signal to teachers who are reading this book, hey, this is not another one of these goofy, disconnected academics who wouldn't last 15 minutes alone in your classroom with your kids. I'm not saying I could teach as well as you, but I'm saying I've been hanging around a lot of teachers who are great at this. And here's what I have learned from them. And so in putting vignettes at the beginning of each chapter, I was wanting to signal to the teachers who are reading that this is a person with a teacher vantage point who's also writing this book. And I wanted to give my teachers who are reading this book, because these are the people that I care about. I wanted my teachers who are reading this book, I kind of care about other people who read the book, but I mostly care about teachers. We'll edit that part out. I wanted to give them permission to imagine themselves trying out some of these culturally responsive practices with their students. So I wanted to explain what it is we're thinking about when we're trying to be responsive, but I wanted to put it in the context of actual practice. All right, so I'm going to show a video. This is called the Family Narrative Video. When we come back from this video, I'm going to give you a PowerPoint. The PowerPoint has links to this video, so you'll be able to share this with people in your buildings, in your districts. All right, so this is called Family Narrative. We'll talk about it on the other side. It's 17 minutes and 52 seconds.
What we wanted kids to do was interview their parents and figure out a theme that goes throughout their lives. So they took home interview questions, they interviewed their parents, and then they came back and they had to figure out, were my questions deep enough so that I can get an answer of what their theme is? And if not, then I need to go back and figure out a theme in their life. I need to ask these questions that are deep enough so that I can figure out a theme in my parents' life.
This project is really good because it brings you closer to your family. And I asked my mom some questions, and it really brought me closer to her. I really didn't know all this stuff about her, but now it makes me think her a whole different way. I respect her more.
Well, I personally wanted the kids to connect with their families and learn stories about their families and their family members, and just deepen their relationships with people, with the family members they feel close to. And also, we wanted them to understand the bigger idea of themes in people's lives and how, all of us humans have stories and experiences, and sometimes we have common themes in our lives and common life lessons and takeaways from various experiences. And we wanted the kids to see that, if you ask the right questions or if you take the time to interview a family member, you'll learn these cool stories about your families, but also you can find these common themes that maybe your classmate found in their family as well.
So we were helping kids figure out what is theme, how does theme relate to your family. So for some families it was, I have a resilient family, or we've been through a lot but we're so hopeful for more, or we've had struggles and struggle creates character. Something to that effect of that your family has an underlying theme, and sometimes it's from many generations, and sometimes it's just within this current generation of you have to have a struggle in order to get what you want.
So how we're doing these interviews in this project, how is that helping you with your reading and writing later?
It will help me with kind of realize what a good writer will look like, and be able to kind of judge books better and maybe see if they have enough elaboration, but then also take from what I've read to then and find theme. Definitely find theme. That's a big one. And then take it and then use it in my writing from what other readers can do.
I learned a lot about just the families and the kids and the home lives that they're coming from, and the experiences of their families coming to this. A lot of them coming to this country, they were refugees in other countries, or they came from really bad circumstances in other countries, and so it was enlightening to hear those stories.
We are honoring a text that is the story of our students' families' experiences that I expect to be tremendously empowering for a lot of our kids.
Grandfather's story really affected me, and it affected me because I never got to my grandfather, and I would feel hurt if I had grandchildren and they never got to meet me. I would feel hurt, just like I feel hurt that I never got to meet my grandfather.
I wanted the kids to take away the sense that, that they can talk to their family members, that their family members have a history and a very interesting past. And I wanted them to learn to speak to their family members more and to have that conversation and share stories more.
And that's exactly what happened. A lot of my kids had said that they never talked to their parents about their lives. They were very interested in a lot of the stories that their parents said. I even had one kid say, I didn't know I could just talk to my mom about things. So it was exactly what I wanted.
Like, it made me feel closer to my dad, like connected to the story about him joining the marching band and liking music and liking the trumpet. It made me feel more connected to him because he likes music like I do, and that's how I feel, and that's how I got affected. Because I never knew that he joined the marching band, so that's something that I learned.
Honestly, the planning was intensive. We started with Yummy and we were talking about what are our learning targets? What do we really want kids to get from this? And he had brought to us the read, write, think. It was kind of a skeleton. It was a family narrative that we had gone from. And so he brought us that, and a teammate and we kind of used that as our skeleton and were responsive to what our kids were going through. So we would do a couple of days, look to see kind of what they were getting from it, and then add what we needed to really be able to get kids to see theme within their families.
Going through the QFT, the question formulation technique, to help them like create those probing questions for their interviews was also very rigorous. Having them write their family narratives was also pretty rigorous for a lot of students. And some students, it was just even like extracting or finding that theme.
So creating the questions was our first point of rigor. The kids first started with a tremendous amount of closed questions versus open-ended questions, and then they had to take those closed questions and turn them into open-ended questions. So that was, took some flexible thinking for them. Asking the questions and interviewing their parents, they actually recorded it, and when they came back to school to start writing about it, if they realized that there was missing pieces, they had to know that they could go back and re-interview and ask for more questions. Also, finding theme in an event in somebody's life can be very difficult. Theme's a very complex thing. So that was a lot of the rigor, and just learning how to ask questions and draw the details you want, and then ask responsive questions according to the answers.
I would type more to my mom about how she met my dad, because she didn't give me all the juicy details, she just gave me some, which I want all the juicy details.
How do you think that this project is going to help you further down with reading and writing?
I think it'll help me with reading to find like the theme in books and like help me have empathy when I'm reading a book, and in writing to like do more like transitions and like feelings in my writing. I felt like it was a way to help me persevere through hard times and like challenge me to go beyond the surface level.
What do you mean by that?
Like, at the beginning, I just wanted to stick with the first one, but then I realized if I couldn't do that, I could go even farther, and I could always keep on continuing.
What do you mean the first one and continuing? What were you continuing with?
I was continuing on elaborating and putting in more detail.
We worked really closely together to try to figure out, what do our kids need? What are they getting? What are they not? How can we then modify that and then continue on with the project? And so just being really responsive to the needs of our students.
I would change that I would go deeper with my mom with asking questions, and I would change the topic a lot. I think what was challenging was that we got to write, and that we really struggled a lot writing, but we still got it.
The rigor that I encountered through this process was not what I expected. I hadn't thought, oh, we'll have the rubric, we have a final idea of what we want the kids to give to us, and I was thinking my rigor was going to be more involved with how do kids ask questions, helping them build those more interesting questions. And instead, it ended up to be that I had to kind of have a release of control, that the kids were going to take this and kind of build their own. And that was not what I expected. So it was rigorous for me as the teacher of, I did not expect that to occur.
I would change my first paragraph because it just needs a little bit more details, and that I would tell my mom more questions about what she did when she was moving.
It was cross-curricular and it was also like off-curricular. Like there's nothing in any standards or anything that says, you know, get to know your family members. But speaking and listening, it definitely had a lot to do with speaking and listening, your language standards, your writing standards, reading standards, because we used a lot of text of other people and their stories. And we had the kids kind of pretend they were asking the person who had written that text questions to, you know, teach them how to be responsive questioners.
I would like to talk more to my mom about her past and her story.
I was kind of inspired by the story. I was proud that she came all this way from Algeria, and it's saying that she started as an immigrant and living in Algeria now, and now she lives in America. She's a French teacher, and she teaches at Grandview. And I just felt inspired because she's in Algeria. In Algeria, it's kind of hard to do all that stuff. It's insanely hard to do all that stuff because Algeria is not as rich as America, and you can't really accomplish things.
I would definitely do it again. There was so much value to the kids and their families, the relationships that they provided to us, but also, well, they showed to us, but that the kids were building with their family member. And I would make some changes. I think I would help the kids kind of develop a little bit more their initial interview. I think the initial interview was too broad and the kids were not sure. So I think I would probably lessen it down to a couple fewer questions. And then I would probably, I would probably have the parents come in so that the kids can present with their parents. The kids only got to present at conferences, which was many months later. For me, in my classroom, the kids were reading their papers to their parents in conferences, and the parents were touched. A couple parents cried. Many parents smiled of like, this was about us or our family or, you know, great grandma who had passed away, or it was a special kind of moment between the families and myself.
I suggest that other kids should interview their parents just like I did, because you can get to know them better. And what I liked about this project is that I got to have I got to get connected to my mom's childhood.
Kids that talk with their parents and know more about their parents' history are more resilient. And so this is something I think we owe our kids, because resilience is something that's really hard to teach. And sometimes family connection with YouTube and people working 2-3 jobs and TV and video games, we might be losing that kind of storytelling and passing history on. So I think we owe it to our kids to do something like this. You know, it doesn't have to be done in a 4-week chunk. It could be done in little projects.
What I like about this project is that it brings me closer to my dad. And what I like about this project, it brings me closer to my dad. And I think other people like this because it brings them, because they're gonna learn like more about they're gonna learn more about their family member.
Like what I'm doing over spring break is the kids are interviewing a family member about what school was like when they were in elementary school. And we did a QFT for that. And then they're going to interview their family member, and then they're going to come back and we're going to do a compare contrast writing. So you can use this kind of like talk to your family member in all kinds of writing and other ELA things.
I do want to suggest other people doing this at home, even though it's not an assignment in school. So I suggest doing this. It's very cool, and it might bring somebody in your family that doesn't talk or be with you that much to be closer to you. What I like about this project, I like it. Honestly, I don't like it. I love it. I love this project. We're gonna learn more about my dad. I had fun writing. We didn't just do projects. We learned that we have the grit. We have grit. We had our time to do it. We have, and we could take stories because if you want to be writers, like how I'm reading about Malala, I could learn how to make a book.
Jayshawn, how did you feel about this family narrative project?
I felt good about it, but I didn't feel like super good about it because we had to pick one family member, and I felt like because I did my mom, and I felt like my dad he felt like left out, and like school activities because I usually pick mom for something like that.
Do you feel like it would have been better if we could have picked another? Do you think you can still ask your dad questions? So can you still go home and ask your dad all the questions? What else do you feel about it?
I feel like for most of the part I feel good.
Why?
I feel like good about it because like I really want to know more about my family narrative.
Definitely want to do this again next year. Adjustments there would be a lot. Now that we've been through it, I kind of know now where possible stumbling blocks may be. But I would use solid read alouds. I found one, thankfully, during this unit. It was called Finding Winnie, which was a narrative of Winnie the Pooh and how that was based on a real family story. Finding more mentor texts like that and having a personal, me doing it with them. I showed them an interview with me and my family, but I never completed the project like they did. So having it completed and showing them the completed project would be helpful as well, I think, for the next time around, and student examples.
I definitely will do this next year. I think we should start the year with this. That's one of the changes that I will come up with. Having kids be able to tell their story at the beginning of the year and connecting to school in a way where they see my home and school are combined and we're together, and my teacher honors my culture, my family, who I am. I think you can't ask for a better way to start the year.
Okay. That last teacher who was speaking, Chris Allen, her classroom was one of my favorite classrooms to go and test ideas out a few years ago. She's a coach now in the Cherry Creek School District in the Denver area. I gave her a draft of my chapter 3 for the current book, and she gave me some feedback, and she was brutal. And her biggest point was, you are writing this as if you are reading a dissertation out loud, to which I loudly objected. You say that as if reading a dissertation out loud is a bad thing. But I got her point. Her point was, right, talk to us the way you talk to us in professional development and residency spaces. And so if I can just be forthcoming for a second, right? I'm a person who, I pulled up this book. Who knows who Keith Richards is? This is a book from a couple of years ago, an autobiography, Keith Richards' life, guitarist for the Rolling Stones. I had a Rolling Stones period where I was super into the Stones. I like the concept of the Rolling Stones. I like the fact that Keith Richards is a purist. Mick Jagger's a rock star, but Keith Richards is a purist. He's a musician. And so I imagine that if I was a guitar player, a highlight of my guitar playing career would be to be performing in some small venue and Keith Richards walks in and gives me the nod, right? One purist to another. Anybody familiar with Doug Lamov, Teach Like a Champion 3.0? This is his newest book. Doug shouted me out many times in this book. He's a big fan of the idea of relationships, the theme of relationships. I'm going to show my screen here. Again, this is one of the themes that we spend time talking about as we are operationalizing our understanding of what we mean by culturally responsive education. Put these themes back up for us to see. Again, the themes on the left are from chapter 3 in the book. These themes came about over about 5 years when I was at New York University, working with teachers and teams of teachers across the country, trying to figure out what are the root causes of equity gaps and what are some of the pedagogical practices that we can bring to classrooms that help to close these equity gaps. And so the 6 themes, this is really our vocabulary for thinking about culturally responsive education. Essentially, what I'm saying with the 6 themes is that if you understand what these themes mean, if you have your own personal relationship with these ideas, then you are probably thinking about the right things in the right ways. Again, my argument is that this is not an algorithm. This is a mental model. It's a kind of heuristic. It's not about us charting out step by step in the way that we would follow a recipe for pound cake. This is creating an experience of a meal in the way that a chef would, using the ingredients and then fashioning the ingredients into a culinary experience that matches the expectations, the palate of the actual diners, the chef's audience. These 6 themes give direction to our thinking. Engagement, cultural identity, relationships, vulnerability, assets, rigor. Chapter 3 in the book, I'm not going to try to give a full definition for each of these. I'm going to highlight a couple of them. I'll highlight cultural identity. Cultural identity speaks to the richness of our students' identities. We are, one way that you can think of what a human is we are kind of the composite of these different social aspects of ourselves. There are multiple spaces in which you have some level of familiarity for the rules and the norms in those spaces. You know how to human in those spaces in such a way that signal to others that I've got a similar frame of human reference to you. I know how to show up and be in this space in a way that honors the traditions, the norms, the values, the histories of the peoples who are a part of this people group, however it can be defined. We learn how to think in these spaces. And so cultural identity, this theme, gives direction for how we are creating opportunities, facilitating opportunities for our kids to draw down from these different parts of their background and identity, the narratives, the stories that they share in common with their families and communities, so that they can have one of those, oh, I get it, this is kind of like moments. For my purists on this webinar, if you're like me, you get really jazzed up when you see a kid jumping out of the seat. They want to make a connection. You see it in their face. And if it's one of our students that we are picking on, and when I say picking on, we're setting engagement traps for this kid. And when I set an engagement trap for this kid, I'm giving this kid a chance to present a connection that not only demonstrates their emerging understanding, but provides material for others in the learning environment to make their own connections and understandings too. Is Teresa still on? Teresa Prather, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Turn your camera on just for a second, Teresa. I didn't give Teresa any warning about this.
Okay.
All
No,
right, so
you didn't.
Teresa, you know what I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about when we were in your classroom.
Yes.
I do not remember the little girl's name, but one of the kids, we were thinking about who were the kids that we're trying to be responsive to. And you had a kid who was going through some stuff, and you had been working really hard on your relationship with her. And we set engagement traps for her. Do you remember who I'm talking about? You don't have to say her name.
I do.
And one of the things, right, in our residencies, and I'll give you just maybe like 15, 20 seconds that you can like kind of comment on this and reflect on this. But what we were trying to do is we were trying to set engagement traps for that kiddo where she would be able to pull from her expertise to make a contribution because we wanted her to feel connected to this learning experience.
Yes.
And what I remember is we had a plan for how we were going to start this, but this kid took the first bait. She took the first bait of our engagement trap, and you had to call on her almost before the lesson even started. You made that improvisational decision, which I thought was the right decision. And we kept that kid connected for the whole class. Do you remember that?
Yes, yes. So we had particularly planned ahead for some questions to ask the whole group to kind of get them thinking. And it just resonated with her. And so being that intentional and thinking about how to make sure that kiddo was engaged was critical to carrying out the rest of the lesson. And she did jump right in, and I had intentionally planned other activities and questions to get there, but she went there so quick that I went with it and it worked out great.
All right, it's my show. Turn your camera back off.
All right, it's going away.
Thank you very much, though. And so that's the goal of our residency work. That's what we're trying to think about. We're trying to think about how are we showing our kids that the effort we're asking of you is worth it, that it's justified for me to do this hard work of thinking deeply. And I just remember that, right, because I got a lot of respect for Teresa. And I remember like Teresa kind of looked at me because the kid raised her hand. I saw the kid's hand shoot up. I was still trying to figure out like who the kids were because I hadn't been in the classroom yet. And Teresa kind of looked at me like, should we do it now? And I'm like, I don't know, but she did it. And not only did we keep that kid engaged, how many of you have students who, if we don't keep that kid engaged, we're not keeping the other 4 kids sitting at that table group engaged? And so we had that kid and her group, and I was able to give her a fist bump on my way out. And I was super, super proud of her. So one of the themes, cultural identity, how are we thinking about these engagement traps that we can set? And one of the ways that we can think about an engagement trap is, how do I ask a question in a way that a kid can leverage their own cultural expertise in offering a response? The other theme that I'll talk about just briefly, again, I talked about this theme. This is the theme that Doug Lamothe shouts out a lot in his book, Teach Like a Champion 3.0, the idea of relationships. And again, this is in chapter 3, I give a much fuller description of this theme of relationships. But here, what I'm trying to convey is that we have to think carefully about what we mean by relationships, and we cannot short sell our relationship work, which I see many teachers do. Here on the left of the screen, let me see. I used to know how to use my my tools. I'm not that savvy right now. I'm not feeling super confident in my Zoom skills right now, so I'm not going to try it. But see, I'm messing up. Tried to get too fancy. step beyond the limits of my Zoom abilities and stub my toe. But relationships, we're not just talking about what's happening on the left side of the triangle here. That's good. Teachers being in a relationship with students, students seeing their teachers as multidimensional human beings who are, a part of this classroom community. But on the right of the triangle, we are also trying to connect students with the content. We're trying to connect students with the big ideas that live in our instruction. In some cases, we're trying to connect students just with the general idea of school. And so the whole point of building rapport and relationship with our students, teachers to students and students to teachers, is that on the bottom side of that triangle, when I, as a teacher, sell my relationship with the content, I want my students to see me as trustworthy and as believable so that they can begin to explore what their own relationship might be with the content, having a credible template for what a relationship with content can look like. So these themes, they blend together. They were part of the same cocktail, the same stew, if you will. If you think about the Family Narrative Project, and let me, if we have, I'm gonna put the handouts. Or do you have the handouts available, Anzara? Please, you can just drop them in there, thank you. And in the handouts, you'll see this slide. This slide has live links. You can watch that video. That's the second link that you just saw. For me, that is a learning experience that is culturally responsive because I'm giving my students to understand this big idea, the significant idea of theme, by using in part the experience of their own family. I'm wanting my students to know that you can come to school and show your competence through the expertise you are able to develop about a story that your family shares. As a high school English teacher, and I'm a high school English teacher for any high school English teachers who might see this webinar, I live for the moments where I have kids make these connections to literature, to characters, to themes. When they do that, I feel like I have potentially given them a ticket to a world of unlimited experience. And it's one of the most fun things about being an English teacher. But when my students, and I'm teaching high school English, when they get to me and they conflate theme with plot, they think that when I ask them for theme, I'm really wanting a summary of the story. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. For a lot of people, it's going to be hard to sustain a love affair with reading if the output is so mechanical and lifeless. And I want my kids to think in terms of theme, not plot. Plot is and then. Theme is because. And when I give my kids the chance to think about what's happening in a text and creating some because relationship between events and characters in the book, we have then given ourselves the potential for creating a kind of experience in that classroom that will uniquely connect every single learner into a moment that will effectively stay with them forever. I think of this as culturally responsive education. All right, so in closing, I'll go back. Here's another Rebecca Norris Webb and Alex Webb picture. I like this picture a lot. This picture speaks to me. The residencies give us an opportunity for a layered understanding of what it means to be equitable, I'm hoping that the residencies, I think the residencies give us the opportunity for a layered, rich, nuanced, integrated understanding of what it means for us to be culturally responsive in our teaching. I think this is possible. I'm super excited about the partners that I have with C-STEP, and then I'm also encouraged by the support that the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction in Washington is providing to this project, and very anxious and excited to be able to see you and spend time with your teachers in a residency in your building this year. So thank you. And thanks for everyone who's going to be speaking on panels. And I'm hanging out and looking forward to a great conversation. So I'm done. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So before we shift to our panelists, and we're going to start with Teresa and Kathy and Kylie, so our Clover Park team. And then Mark, you'll be up next, and we'll wrap up with Mimi, so you all know what order things are going in. I do want to introduce the rest of the C-STEP team that's on the call here, just so you can put names to faces as you get emails and communicate with us. Lindsay introduced herself at the beginning. We also have Jeannie Gruber, our finance guru. If you want to get paid from C-STEP, Jeannie is the woman to know. We have Erin Marswick, our logistics coordinator, and Stephanie Prosser, who does our project coordination. So this is Team C-STEP. It's all 5 of us running this magical show that you see. So we're really grateful to be able to work with Dr. Stembridge. So now I'm going to kick it over to our Clover Park folks. So Kathy, Teresa, and Kylie, if you can share a little bit about what it's like to go through a residency from teacher and admin perspective. Thanks.
Well, I can jump in on admin. One of my favorite moments, we've been fortunate enough to do 2 with Yemi, and right out of the gate, he puts the muzzle on the admin. And it's a gift, actually, because he's like, yeah, we don't care what you know, you're here to be a fly on the wall. And if you can't be a fly on the wall, move along. And that's really a gift to be able to just sit and be a learner and just absorb the whole thing from another angle. And I strongly recommend sitting in and participating in that way, because it is truly enriching, and being muzzled is a good thing. And it's a good thing for the teachers to have you be muzzled in the room. But I learned so much by hearing them talk and process and think and observe how it rolled out. So it's truly a gift. So I would say your biggest job is to find space, to find time, to find substitutes, to make it easy for the teachers to just be there. And we have a few really spicy kids, and here or there we needed to pull a teacher to settle a little gremlin down. But for the most part, we were able to keep the integrity of the intention of the program. And the hidden gem for me was the contagion factor, because we would have 3 to 5 people participate, but then what they were able to take back into staff meetings and into the staff room, and there was really great change in the building, even for people who didn't participate. And I'm a huge believer. I'm a guru. I'm a junkie. I am all the things for this program. It's amazing.
Thanks, Kathy. I think, Teresa, you are muted if you're trying to talk next.
So I guess that makes me next. So yes, hello, I'm Teresa Prather, and this is my 4th year teaching. I've been a teacher way longer. I've had the opportunity to participate in 2 of the residencies with Dr. Stembridge. Kathy mentioned he'd been at our building twice. Both experiences that I had in the residency were very different, and but still very impactful 2 times. And I would encourage anyone who's been through it once, and if they have the opportunity, to do it again because it is such a great refresher. The first time was right before we shut down for COVID in 2020. And so the group of teachers that I worked with during the residency, we were all very excited and looking at what we could do differently with our planning and using all those 5 planning questions. And then it became a very different instructional experience for the next couple of years. And so having the opportunity to participate again last year was super exciting and invigorating because it was oh yeah. What I appreciated a great deal about going through the residency was that I think most everyone in education is familiar with Dufour's questions and how to plan for instruction. But there's some not so subtle and substantial differences in Dr. Stembridge's planning questions that really are deeper and a lot more responsibility on the teacher for planning for every individual rather than for a whole class. And adding how do I want the students to feel sounds like an easy question to answer, but it isn't. And so when you really take that into account when planning, it helps you create a more engaging learning experience. They aren't just lessons, they're learning experiences. For me, one of the huge changes, and especially the administrators in the room are going to go, well, yeah, but the notion of incentivizing thinking rather than behavior. And so, it's the beginning of the school year now, and I've got my bag of gummy bears, and if you're following the rules, you can get a gummy bear. But now it isn't that. It's, oh, that was a great answer to this question. Here's a gummy bear. That was a fabulous use of our vocabulary. And so really incentivizing thinking, not always with gummy bears, but just the notion of incentivizing thinking. The greatest benefit of going through the residency was the time with Dr. Stembridge in preparing for the last couple days of the residency, where we took time to plan out units and to plan out units that started in an engaging way for kids and to really focus on that levels of engagement. It's not the curriculum that you have, it's what you do with it. So it's not a canned, here it is, follows page 1. It's how to plan for and be really intentional about the thinking that you want to generate and the activity engagement, using things like GIFs or video, something that will really tie into the kids and get them interested. The super toolkit, it's not a toolkit, it's a super toolkit, was amazing. So many resources, such a wealth. And so I still, every time I'm planning a big unit, look at that super toolkit, what could I draw from there? I think that like I said, I've been a teacher for a very long time, and I think I'm a decent teacher. And it's not that anything Dr. Stembridge says or does is rocket science or, nothing that isn't good teaching. It's good teaching, but it's focused. And so I appreciated that. Challenging me to think about every kid in the room, not just the one who's being naughty or disruptive and how I'm going to deal with that and get that kid engaged, but also that quiet kid. And so it is really thinking about every single student and what will it take to get them involved in their learning. It was invigorating and energizing, and I can't speak highly enough about it. So that's what I have to share from Custer.
Thank you. Kylie, anything to add?
Just that I want to do it again. So I have had the luxury of going through this twice at 2 different schools. So just like Teresa mentioned, we did it in the very end of February 2020 at my previous building, and then had the opportunity again last December to do it at the building that I'm currently at. And it is one, if not the #1 most highly talked about PDs that my staff has ever done. I think there's so many things that feed into that. Yemi is a fabulous presenter, but I also think the small group PD aspect of it, it really allows whoever your team is, both times. The first time I did 2 different grade levels, I did 4th and 5th together. And then the second time I did just my 2nd grade team because it was a larger team. Their ability to intentionally plan together and then observe and then reflect, not only brought them together as a team, but I think also having his expertise in the room, having that time, I think is huge too. That's not usually built into your day as a teacher, being able to go do something and then immediately reflect on it. Like Kathy had said, the sub situation is always tricky, but it is so worth it if you're able to get all of the ducks in a row. It makes such a huge difference. Our district is also going down the Universal Design for Learning, UDL, and this partners really well with that. And so I think that was a really nice piece too for teachers to kind of see that in action. The other thing that I think is just the biggest gift of this process is teaching teachers, and they know this, but there's just not opportunities to be reflective. That reflective piece, I just can't emphasize that enough. And then my only other plug would be that if you are interested in doing this, I would highly recommend doing the book study that is coming up with one of the teachers that did thing. Let me quiet that for a second, but doing the book study, because it really helps you kind of get a big picture before you go into, you don't have to by any means, but it is definitely helpful to do the book study, and we're all busy. And so if you jump on the C-STEP book study, then it guides you through it and then you don't have to do it by yourself. So those are my big takeaways.
Great. Thank you so much. I was just going to ask someone to pop that book study link in the chat. So I really appreciate that and your sharing. So now we have Mark and Erica from Riverview, and panelists, if you can stay on, if we have questions, great. If you have to go do your thing, thank you for being here. We totally know that you're trying to juggle being on a webinar and running a building and teaching. So thanks to the team from Clover Park. Let's hear from Mark and Erica.
All right, so there really isn't much more to add besides what Kylie and Teresa said. I think my biggest takeaway was just how powerful this residency was. We were in the middle of a sub shortage, and they told us halfway through that about half of us wouldn't be able to finish the residency. And we pretty much revolted and said, we have to be there. Like, we need to finish this. This is just amazing. And personally, I've never done that with a PD before. I mean, I've had some really great ones, but this one was just phenomenal in that sense. And they found a way for most of us to be able to finish it up, and it was well worth the time and the effort of making sure that we were all there. I think like my biggest takeaway from this was just that flippant thinking, in the sense that we should be focusing on like the assets that students have and putting that in the center of everything. And our teaching should be in response to the students, right? Having some mini lessons ready to go based upon what it is that the students are learning through their inquiry process. Really kind of restructuring our units in the sense that we want to start with that framing experience where they have a much higher like depth of knowledge activity that they start with to just kind of hook them in. And then every lesson after that, just tying back to that. Remember when that thinking you just did, that connection that you made, how does this tie to that? And just constantly getting the kids to see that and going back to that engaging moment that they had in the very beginning. That was another one of my aha moments. We actually went into a classroom and watched a teacher teach the lesson that we put together, and seeing those kids turn around. Like, he would tell us about the students, how some of them were just so disengaged, and then seeing them engage from that moment that class started and that entry task that he had, and just that engagement all the way through, and seeing that this process really does work.
I'm going to jump in. I want to point out that Erica is middle school. Like, we heard from elementary folks from Clover Park. These were middle school students going through this. So I want to point out that it's not just like it works for elementary. Like, it works for students across the board. So keep talking. I just want to make sure people have the middle school brain.
I talked to a couple colleagues too that completed the residency with me. And another part that really stood out to us is just that the Rigor matrix being tied into the standards, and how helpful that tool was in trying to plan the unit and plan the lessons, and knowing that, okay, not every single lesson has to be at a high depth of knowledge, but those other lessons should build towards that depth of knowledge, and really just using that thinking to create these engaging lessons for the students based upon their assets and their strengths. And I had never thought about culturally responsive teaching like that before. And it made sense. And I think that it is a valuable experience. So, Mark?
My turn?
Yeah.
Yep. All right, thanks, Erica. I actually have a visual, if that's okay, if I share my screen.
It should be. Let's make sure you can. Yes.
Yeah. All right, so let's see if I can get this. Move that out of the way. There we go. So, I'm a kind of an instructional coach. I work for teaching and learning. I support teachers at the middle level and also at our high school. We had such a successful experience at our middle school that we're actually very solidly thinking about applying for our high school this time. But there are some things that we've pushed for in our own trainings. I like to think that I'm pretty good at what I do, but Dr. Stembridge, he's got me beat. And some of the things that we've pushed for in teaching and learning, but we haven't seen a whole lot in spite of our efforts. That E word, equity, we've had to teach some standalone lessons to our staff, and they're not always really well received because they're standalone lessons. And, wouldn't it be great if we could embed equity through everything we do in the lesson design? And Stembridge's model, he's done that. It is embedded throughout, and you don't necessarily notice that it's happening all the way through, and so it doesn't kind of put you in a defensive posture, especially if you're not a person of color and you're responsible for teaching all of this. But number two, starting a lesson design with a standard and not an activity. If you're an admin, you know that teachers like to start with activities, and even though we push really hard to get people to start with a standard, it doesn't always happen. Sometimes the standard creeps in at the end of the lesson design process instead of at the beginning. And, with Yemi's model, they start with a standard. The teachers have to find one, and then they have to weave in the matrix of Bloom and Webb. We've always tried to get teachers to do that, but, how does it happen? Well, with Yemi's model, it happens right at the beginning of the lesson. And the way they keep students centered at the center throughout is just amazing. I'm a little disappointed that Yemi didn't call on us, because we had a model that was very much student-centered. We were able to lay an engagement trap. Let me move ahead to a picture of something that's kind of scary looking. But this is an axolotl. I know Dr. Stembridge will remember this. We had a student who presented herself, a sixth grader. Every day she would come to school wearing a unicorn hat, full complete with the horn, and dark sunglasses. And that's how she operated in the world. And she knew everything there was to know about these crazy salamanders called axolotls. I didn't even know what they were. Now, our teachers, kind of were getting a little tired of her talking about axolotls at every turn. But during an engagement or a lesson on, it was, let's see, what was the lesson? It was a science lesson on genetics. And our sixth grade science teacher wanted to lay an engagement trap for this student who was very difficult to reach. And so we said, hey, what about those crazy gills or whatever those things are that are sprouting out of this animal's head? How about if we lay an engagement trap with that from a genetic standpoint? And so when the student walked into class and saw this PowerPoint slide with an entry task of an axolotl, her eyes just about exploded. So she was engaged from the very beginning. And then that led us into a lesson on genetics. What is it about those gills that made this animal successful? And so that was very important. That's an example of how we laid an engagement trap for a student. And then Eric already mentioned number 5, how the staff demanded the professional learning at the end. Even now, months later, our central office people are just talking kind of in awe about how these teachers, Erica wasn't exaggerating when she said that they revolted. She sent some pretty hot emails, and so did her peers. Mark, you said the central office would empty out. They would come down and fill classrooms. What's going on? Why aren't they here? And, when those emails started hitting the director of teaching and learning, started hitting the assistant director of teaching and learning, they had to get in their cars and drive down and free up the teachers so they could finish their third day of participation. We just haven't seen that, and I feel like we've put out some pretty good professional learning, but nobody, fought that hard for the right to become a better teacher. So that's what we ended up seeing. And then I was hoping that Erica would talk about what happened in the aftermath, how a kind of an ad hoc PLC or professional learning committee just sprouted out of thin air with the 9 participants from our middle school who are participating. So I don't know if you'd be willing to talk about how you guys decided to meet on Fridays. Here, let me get rid of, I'll stop sharing. There we go.
Yeah, so really this wasn't my idea to continue. I was part of it, but a colleague of mine, she's like, hey, why don't we just, each Friday on our early release Fridays when we get to decide who we're collaborating with, why don't we just send an email out to all the people that were part of this and say, hey, if you want to meet in so-and-so's classroom and share ideas with each other and bounce ideas and work on recreating our units to follow this plan and this model, come on in. And it turned out that there's probably about 5 or 6 of us that would meet each Friday that we had available to just continue the work that we had started in the residency. And we're hoping to continue that again this year. So that's our plan moving forward, at least.
Perfect. Yeah, so that's exactly what you want to have happen after a professional learning experience. You want the work to continue. You don't want it to be an event that they check the box and everybody goes back to being the exact same teacher they always were. So I have to say, Dr. Stembridge, I'm impressed that this has legs. It continues after you leave. So that's really nice. All right, that's it from Tilton Middle School.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's one of the most amazing things was hearing that the teachers revolted. It said, you said you were going to cover our classes, get down here, and we still want to keep meeting after the time. So as somebody who's done PD for many, many years, that's what you wish for, but don't always get to see. So thank you so much for sharing. And last, I want to invite Mimi Brown from Everett School District to share her experiences from the district perspective of getting some residencies up in Everett.
Thanks, Anzara. Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. We had Dr. Stembridge. We were lucky enough to have him several times at one of our elementary schools here. So I'm speaking from that perspective. And after that first residency, you've already got a taste of that from the other folks that shared. We had that level of empowerment and engagement among the staff that we asked to be on a waiting list. And if anyone canceled due to sub shortage, as other districts already said, we said we would leave the district office and we would go cover those classrooms so that way the experience could spread among that school. And it was really, really successful. Teachers were empowered. They took the cognitive rigor matrix. They kept planning. Dr. Stembridge asked them just to try 3 units, give it 3 units so it'll stick. And they followed through on their own accord. And they asked me to come out and we're sharing what they had planned. And I also went out and saw it implemented with students. And it was pretty amazing to see it from the point of view of them planning with Dr. Stembridge and going in and enacting that and then doing it on their own in their classroom. Really wonderful teachers. And to that point, something I observed is every PLC has different personalities in it. And I watched a lot of different grade levels that had different personalities with different levels of experience teaching. And because the rigor was so high for the teachers as well, they were able to work at such an engaged level that I think sometimes that's hard to do with different personalities and different strengths. That was a really powerful thing to see among the different groups that got to work with him. And then the other thing was that sustainability piece coming out of the pandemic. One of the teachers came back, and often on that 3rd day when people are talking about what they're taking away and they're going to carry with them, there's tears that pop up because of the emotion. You know, teaching is a work of art, and that definitely comes out when you see a transformation in your students and sometimes yourself. And one teacher said that they went home and talked to their husband and said, I have all these ideas. I was just talking about some things that they wanted to implement, and her husband replied and said, you haven't come home like that for a while. And I think moments like that, with how hard things have been, are really inspiring to see the level of professional development. People have already said, I could repeat what everyone else has said, but the level of inspiration, the level of engagement, and the level of rigor for teachers when we were already so tired, it was definitely just authentic, and teachers wanted to engage and keep going, and they've asked him to come back again this year. So I would say I'll just come from that heartfelt moment of that was the impact on our district.
Yes. Thank you, Mimi. And I will say, because of Mimi's tenacity at the district level, Everett was able to, that school got 3 residencies because we had cancellations last minute. And I emailed Mimi and she's like, we'll get subs. Whatever magic. I know you were on the phone calling people and saying, save the state, we need you, we need you. And so while it's difficult and challenging, I would say it's 100% worth the energy and legwork it takes to get the subs.
Absolutely agreed. And we were ready to go in, and some of us did, to cover pieces just to make it happen. And I think as some of the educators on the screen already spoke to, that meant a lot to them, that the time it showed that it elevated the purpose.
Yeah.
Can I say something really quick, Hanzar?
Yeah, of course.
Real quick. So about, that's Madison Elementary, right?
Yep.
At Madison, right? So one of the things that I noticed, and when we can do this, it's awesome. Whenever I'm first working with a team, there's understandable disbelief from teachers, right? Like, 3 days, dude, 3 days? What are we gonna do for 3 days? And then once we get going, and it's my job, in the same way that I'm asking teachers to be responsive to their students, it's my job to be responsive to the teachers. The beautiful thing about being able to double up at a school is the first residency, I'm convincing people why we're even in the room, why we should be doing this. Let's think deeply, and I'm modeling engagement. But the second residency, once teachers have been talked into the room by their peers, we're not selling the work. We're just going hard. We're thinking deeply about what's good for our students. And so whenever we can have that return trip, and I think the same thing happened at Custer, once the teachers are communicating to their peers that there's value in this, then the second and the third residency, it's like, we're cooking with hot grease now.
Definitely.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing, those folks who've been through this before. I think it really adds a layer of understanding of what it looks like and feels like in the classroom and for the teachers who experience it. We had a couple of folks submit questions as they registered, and I want to make sure that we get those answered and then open it up to any additional questions that we have. So Yemi, I'm mostly kicking these to you answer. So one of the questions was about, we have CTE teachers, and I've heard also like we've got art teachers and ceramics teachers and, you know, what all the different kind of specialty teachers, and how is this experience for them who are not core content classroom teachers?
Yeah, so, you know, I'm going to share a screen. Let me pull up a slide. So as Mark was discussing, I really like to use the Karen Hess cognitive rigor matrix. And one of the beautiful things about the Hess cognitive rigor matrix that incorporates Bloom's taxonomy with Norman Webb's depth of knowledge is we get this really useful visual for charting our rigor targets. Rigor is not about a particular type of content. Rigor is not about how hard something is. Rigor is not about how much we assign. Rigor points to how we want students thinking. How, meaning Bloom's category of thinking and Webb's depth of knowledge. And when we can marry type of thinking, category of thinking with depth of knowledge, we can more accurately pinpoint the kind of thinking that we want from our students, which means we're better at being able to present the learning opportunities in ways that kids can draw on their identities to make connections. There are versions of the cognitive rigor matrix for career and technical education, for performing and visual arts, for physical education, for science, math, all the content areas, humanities, social studies, math, science. So when we are thinking about our targets for rigor, regardless of the content area, what we're asking is what are the most interesting questions that we can ask our students that allow them to make connections with the most important parts of the learning target. And so we can do that in every content area, and we can start the unit-long learning experience off with that. And I do think that units are the level of planning that is most appropriate for culturally responsive teaching, right? And I think of culturally responsive teaching as useful for closing equity gaps. The other thing that I would say, though, just in response to that question is, I would love to be able to push for more collaboration across disciplines. I think that a big part of what's wrong, what's not working in terms of equity for various socio-ethno-linguistic groups that we serve is we are often, whenever you compartmentalize an understanding, you segment it off in terms of the math part of it, the science part of it, the history part of it, the English part of it, the CTE part of it, the art part of it. Whenever you are teaching in siloed ways, the understandings that you're teaching are more abstract than if you were teaching them in an interdisciplinary way. When you are teaching something in an interdisciplinary way, it gives more practical application of the big ideas, because big ideas don't live in buckets. And so one of the things that I would love to be able to push, and maybe this will be something that a team can bring, right? An interdisciplinary team. I would love to get a 7th grade and 8th grade interdisciplinary team where we plan a 3 or 4 week long unit drawing on the different content areas, content standards in the different core areas. And let's look for how we can make these on-ramps and connections for kids through a variety of disciplines. Because some of our kids, I'm going to draw them in through an engagement trap that I set in art class. But we're not talking about just coloring in, lines, right? We're talking about like using a conceptual understanding that we can express in artistic medium in order to bridge a deeper understanding that also lives in other content areas as well. And so, so I think that's CTE, art, physical education. We need to have teams across the content areas that we can bring together, and we can pick on some kids, set some engagement traps that we can then borrow from and play out across their whole day, not just in one of their class periods in a school day. So I would say let's think about that.
Awesome. Mark's already saying, told in, let's do it. Let's do it.
I wanted to pop on just for a second because we also got that question about CTE and specifically for careers and education courses. So I just think that that is a crazy meta idea that would be pretty awesome. So if you are out there and you're thinking, these are our high school kids that are interested in a career in education, I think this would change so much in the future if there was a student who was having a lesson in this culturally responsive education, or this culturally responsive way about culturally responsive education, like hurts my head in such a good way. So I just wanted to zero in on that, on the question that I saw.
And let me just add this to that, Lindsay. So, right now we have a national teacher shortage, and in some parts of the country it's desperately bad. And there's always been this conversation, or there's been a conversation for a good chunk of time about the lack of diversity in the national teaching force. And my answer to that is always, if we want a more diverse teaching force, we have to start recruiting kids in high school. And so we have to have, future teachers clubs, and we have to have these kinds of projects that you're talking about, Lindsay, because one of the things that I think we have to do as we continue to professionalize teaching and make sure that we're, building schools and the policy environment in schools that supports and centers teacher professional judgment in making those improvisational decisions that pull kids in. We got to start preparing kids to think about that as a potential career, early. And I think if we do that, we have to create our own pipelines. If we're just waiting on pipelines to magically develop, I think we're going to, have an understaffing that we have, and I think we're going to have a less and less diverse population of teachers. So I think it's a really important idea.
I think that goes back to me even to that lesson that we watched the video about. If those kids see their family and their school connected and they feel valued and important in school, that's a place you might want to come back. But if you feel like you're not valued and important, that's not a place you're going to want to then spend the rest of your professional career in, right? So the more connected and valued they feel and appreciated, I think the more we'll see them. So I'll stop, but that was just really connected to me when that teacher said, they're seeing their family and school together. And that's what makes people want to spend their life doing that.
Right. Another question that we got was, what aspects of this work would be important and crucial for first-year educators?
I often think that first and second year teachers who do this are kind of especially benefited, but I pause because sometimes, right, like a teacher who comes into the profession who was super successful in school themselves, they have a lot of ideas to unlearn about teaching. If they were really good at being able to sit down and just kind of follow lectures and, not challenge directions, and, if they had a cultural fluency that was in line with the dominant fluencies of the school building, they may not even fathom the way that schools are not responsive to other students' identities. So let me pause, right? Because sometimes first and second year teachers are so locked in to their own paradigms that they do have to unlearn that. But here's what I really think happens. I think it's great for first and second year teachers, because I think it really just kind of, again, sets a table for them for what, how they're benchmarking what's happening in their classroom, what they make note of to be reflective about, right? There's a lot of things that can happen in the school day. and some stuff you need to let go, and some stuff you need to think about, and just being able to discern which category an event falls into can be like super useful. But I think that that this is great for first and second year teachers. But I also think that for any teacher who really cares about the craft, a teacher who's invested, I think it's good for them. And then also last year, I'm thinking about many of the residencies where I had teachers who pulled me aside and told me that they were on the verge of quitting, and that their principal asked them to hang out for this residency and to hold off on making a decision. And that's often where some of the tears come in, right? As a teacher saying, like, I was thinking about bailing, but if my district is supporting this way of thinking about teaching, I'm gonna hang in there and try some of these ideas that aren't, as people were saying, right? These aren't necessarily new ideas, but we're just trying to put them into a framework that these really good ideas about teaching are accessible to us. Chapter 6 of the book that I'm working on right now is titled Improvisation. And I've learned a lot about improvisation. Interestingly enough, I'm a person who loves to go to jazz clubs. If there are any people who are listening to this webinar who like to go to jazz clubs, next time you're in New York, my favorite jazz club, basically in the whole world, is Small's Live Jazz Club. It's probably smaller than your family room if you got a single family house, but you go there to hear real jazz musicians improvise in jazz combos, quartets, trios. And what I've learned in researching for this book, right, is that improvisation is not an entirely new creation with every performance. Really, with improvisation, you kind of build up a mini toolkit of what they call in jazz licks, riffs, adaptations that you can spin on the chords and the rhythms so that you pull your audience in whatever way the audience is available to be pulled in. And so chapter 6 in the book, I'm really defining what this idea of improvisation, this musical artistic concept of improvisation, how it applies to the way we can think about culturally responsive education. And I think that I say that to say, a teacher who's got 5, 6, 7 or more years of experience under their belt, a lot of times they've kind of, they're familiar with kind of generally what we would expect to see in a classroom instruction, and now they're ready to really perfect their improvisational moves. And so I think that this way of thinking is also really useful to them. But I would also just say, Zara, right, to this question, one of the things that we try to do is, I download this data from my C-STEP partners. They are quizzing the point people in the building. So if a principal is going to have a team, part of what you're thinking about is strategically, what's the impact that you're trying to have in your building? So, if I'm a principal, I would never be a principal because I'm sane. If I was a principal, I would be thinking about who are the ambassadors in the building, who are the teachers that other teachers listen to. That's what I saw Kylie do the first time. Nobody warned me, but I figured out pretty quickly, right? There were 2 people in particular in that building who other people are going to listen to, and I got to be responsive to them. I got to speak to them in a way that they're going to see the utility of this, and then they're going to be the ones who go on and convey what the building needs from this conversation. I hesitate to call it professional development because I think of it as something much more experiential than traditional PD models. But really, like if you got a team of first and second year teachers that you want to make available for a residency, then that's how we're going to fashion the experience. We're going to make sure that we're kind of speaking to the issues that your first and second year teachers are bringing to bear. If we got a mix, right, I'm going to try to figure out what the on-ramp for every person in the room is. The experience itself is a responsive experience. But definitely, I think that if you got first and second year teachers, what I would do, and then I'm going to stop talking about this question, what I would do if I've got a first and second year teachers, a cadre of them, is I'm putting at least 1 or 2 coaches in that room also. Mm-hmm. And I'm making sure that the coaches are going to be available to support the teachers in continuing the conversation beyond the residency. And I think that that's how you plant seeds throughout a building and start to see the seeds bear fruit. And then once the seeds start to sprout and bear fruit, then you have the teachers show the fruit to each other. And then in that way, it becomes the property of the building and, not just a pleasant memory of a professional development experience that we had from before. So that's the goal. We wanted to take root in the building so it continues to live beyond the residency experience.
For sure. Thank you. Are there questions? Lindsay, you had your hand up for a brief second. Not Lindsay, the panelist, Lindsay, the participant. Okay, accident. Got it. I just wanted to make sure. There was a question that was placed before when folks registered, and I think it's been answered, but I just want to bring it to light. And it was after our district has been spending time learning about race and equity, and how does this residency improve on ideas in the classroom? I feel like we've addressed that in hearing from both you and the panelists about making sure the equity origin story is addressed, and how we're looking at students' cultural identity and making sure that they have on-ramps and access points that use their background knowledge, and talking about how we're responsive to our students and from whatever background they're coming from. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes. So what I would say is this, right? And this is, I'm writing about this in chapter 3 of the book that I'm supposed to be submitting in 12 days.
You got it.
Yeah. Race is one component of our identity. It's a particularly prickly subject in the United States of America, given our history with race and racism. Race, however, in terms of the ways that teachers are addressing these issues, race is, we are concerned with the pedagogical implications of race, meaning we want to make sure that we're not bringing baggage that presents obstacles to students' learning opportunities. And we want to make sure that we're developing learning opportunities through which kids can access from all parts of their background, from all parts of their identities. And so I think there's a couple of things, right? It's super important that we're able to have explicit, non-hushed conversations about race, because I think when we are talking about race without an eye on its application, on the understandings of this conversation and how it applies to our teaching, I think conversations on race can be difficult. They can be opportunities for a lot of goofy things to be said, a lot of grandstanding to happen. I am someone who thinks it's important for us to talk about race, but I think we talk about race specifically so that we can empower our students. I am talking about race so that I am less likely to miss an identity bridging opportunity for my kids. And so I think that one of the things that happens in a model, in a residency, is we model how we can have productive conversations about race that play into the way that we are thinking about the design of instruction. And so, yeah, I think that, the other thing I would just say about the residencies, and because I'm always looking for opportunities to make sure that we're putting race on the table. I heard, the poet Nikki Giovanni once. I drew a blank on her name for a second, but I heard her say that in any interaction, any cross-racial interaction between two human beings, at any moment, race may mean everything or nothing at all. And I think that in terms of our pedagogy in the classroom, what we're looking to be able to do is to discern when and how my understandings of race and racism and the goals of racial equity should be informing my practice in the classroom. And a lot of that is just modeled through real conversation in the context of designing learning experiences that empower kids. So yeah, you know, a lot more that we could say about that, but I think that when we're talking about culturally responsive education, we're not talking about something that excludes race. But when we think about cultural identity, your cultural identity includes, but is not limited to, your racial identity. And so we try to be mindful of that as we plan.
Great. Thank you. So for those who are watching or the recording or just want to know, just to reiterate, like C-STEP is partnering with OSPI and providing 24 residencies to schools in Washington this year. We have 8 scheduled right now, which means we've got 16 left, if I can math really quickly. So that means there's opportunities for districts and schools to apply. So what OSPI, what C-STEP provides with the help of OSPI is Dr. Stembridge for 3 days, 18 hours. We also provide lunch every day for your teachers. And what we're asking districts to provide is subs and this book for the teachers and a location for us to do the training. So classroom, whatever, we need a projector, sound, and space to learn. For those of you who are like, we don't have any money for this at all, sounds great, Anzara. This is a pre-approved use of your TPEP fund, your I-664 grant. Every district gets one of those. Every public district, you can use your 664 money to pay for books and subs for the CRE residency because it is great connections with the instructional frameworks and student growth goals. So again, C-STEP, OSPI provide Dr. Stembridge, lunch, and the PD, wonderful PD, and usually a lovely, friendly face from C-STEP and some C-STEP swag and journals. And you provide the teachers and the subs and the space. So we will put in the chat the link to sign up. It's on our website. And you can just click the application form and fill that out, and you'll hear from me about scheduling or answer any additional questions that we have or that you may have about the residency. Yummy. Lindsay, is there anything else we need to go over? I don't see any other questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So anything else?
You know, what I would just say is that, again, I'm cautious around this term of professional development, but when I used to teach graduate education, foundations of education courses, I would begin the semester by writing on the board, teaching is profoundly human. And my argument would be, right, in this first meeting of the class, that it might be that teaching is the single most human activity of our species, precisely because we are born with so much undeveloped software for our cognitive hardware. We learn how to human by participating in these social spaces. And so humans who have access to other humans who are willing to show them how to human, these are the most successful humans. So teaching is profoundly human, which means that it cannot be reduced to a simple checklist. And what I say is that and I'm hoping that people sign up for these, and because I'm figuring out how to be more responsive and hopefully a little bit better every time we do these residencies. But it is, I think, a really powerful human experience that celebrates this craft of teaching that that I am in such great admiration of. And I just, obviously I'm selling it because I'm, deeply involved in it, but it feels good to be advocating for an experience that teachers have given such high acclaim to. So spread the word. I hope to come out and be able to spend time with you and your teachers. Pick some prickly ones. Pick some teachers who are, some fair naysayers. The teachers who say, there's no way that this is going to be able to be helpful to me, but I'm going to agree to go in and give it an open mind. You might want to just, let me know who that person is just so I can, kind of be on the lookout. But I honestly believe that when we have these residencies, we win people over with a good, solid argument for what we mean by culturally responsive education and what it requires of us. And so if you got some prickly people, if they're teachers, if they're worth being in your building, get them a seat in the residency and let us work on them. So I look forward to being able to hang out with people and learn with you in this really important year for the work of teaching in the state of Washington. So thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for joining us, everyone. If you have questions, shoot me an email. You can find us on the C-STEP website. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you. A special thanks to the panelists who took time out of their day to join us. We really appreciate it.